Good morning and welcome to the Cronin Law Show. I am your host, Sabrina Shaheen Cronin, and I am so excited and honored to have with me today a very special guest. And his name is James Craig. He is the former chief of police of the Detroit Police Department. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Glad to be on your show. And it's hard to, grasp when someone says former chief of police in Detroit. So I'm trying to get used to that.
Yeah. Well, you just retired on June 1st.
Right. Just retired and excited about the future. But I'm really excited about the 44 years that I survived this very difficult profession. As I oftentimes say, I haven't had a bad day in 44 years. Challenging days, absolutely. Rewarding days, but not a bad day. So it's not a lot of folks can say they can go through their entire career and say every day was a great day.
Well, Chief Craig, you have done so much for Detroit. And I first have to say, dealing with everyone around you, all of the people that I've been in touch with and my team has been in touch with, everyone is so helpful, genuinely considerate and thoughtful and kind. And in my opinion, it's just a true reflection of your great leadership. And I know that when you came to Detroit, it was a tumultuous time, and the Detroit Police Department had many issues. And you've done so much. And can you talk about that? And your legacy is just one of so many different things. You've created union and a more decent, polite, professional, just amazing leaders in the police department themselves, the police officers and everyone that we come in contact with now. Yes. And can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, having obviously started as a Detroiter, I don't know if people know that you're a native Detroiter, and you started your career in 1977 in Detroit,
I did.
Well, there, it's almost as if your life's blueprint was set. Your legacy was already in motion. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Right. Well, I got to tell you, you're right. I've been a chief of police in 3 different cities, certainly. And as you pointed out, I did start my policing career here in Detroit. And then after a layoff, moved to Los Angeles. And then from that, after 28 years in retiring from Los Angeles, I fulfilled my dream of becoming chief of police. And that was in Portland, Maine. And then from Portland, Maine, I then became the chief of police in Cincinnati. And then full circle back home. Interesting transition. Once I was reached out to by the state of Michigan to consider being the chief of police in Detroit. As you know, this was a time that we were facing bankruptcy. An emergency manager was in place. And as you pointed out, it was a very different police department, very different community. The community had lost total confidence in the police department.
And the morale was at an all-time low.
The morale was at an all-time low. You talk about defunding. In fact, Detroit police were defunded. They had lost 10% of their pay. The officers that were on patrol were forced to work 12-hour shift. So it was just a bad time here in Detroit. And so as I was preparing to leave, I was approached by local businessmen in Cincinnati. And what they asked me to do is reconsider, stay in Cincinnati, retire, leave the Cincinnati Police Department, become a consultant. We want to run you for office. And so I was flattered and humbled by that. And but I said, no, I'm going to go ahead and go home. And I'm best decision I could have ever made. When I look back at 8 years, to see where we've become a community that has confidence, but not just Detroit, Metro Detroit. They have seen the dramatic shift in how we relate to the community, how we serve this community. And so part of my legacy is that, we treat those men and women who do this difficult task with respect. We honor them. That wasn't really happening. And really, when you look at what's going on around this country, one of the things that I hear is that a lot of Detroit police officers, those who want to join, those who are coming back after leaving, because they feel supported. And that should not be understated. Support is so critical today, especially those police officers that serve honorably.
Right.
They need our support. And so in the community, I mean, now this is a community that knows that police were gone for many years. And I remember early on in my tenure as a chief, when we started to in a very visible way, to attack some very significant quality of life issues, locations that were plagued with historic crime. And for the community to see that was the beginning of restoring faith and building that relationship back. So I have a lot to be excited about as I transition out.
Well, and also to be proud of, you made transparency in your department a top priority. You brought professionalism back, and even Mayor Duggan stated this past May in 2021 that, you did some incredible things relative to the transformation of the police department. And, yes. That can't be said enough. And I'm excited and thrilled. And, it wasn't just the investment by all the major investors in the city that brought the city back to life and brought people coming back to the city and money getting spent. It was you as an amazing leader. And it was you who brought some peace and really tranquility among the citizens. And, along that line, Chief, I'd like to ask you, in your years of experience in all different, levels of the law enforcement career that you served as just a police officer and now as a chief, you've seen riots, you've seen injustice and discrimination and really some public scrutiny, and not just Detroit, but in the other cities that you served. Yes. And how do all of these experiences and your wisdom that you gained from those experiences allow you to identify and be a part of the community and identify with the citizens, that you were in charge of protecting, but then also at the same time police those criminals that, you need to police?
It's a very good point. Really, I've been very fortunate to have obtained the level of depth in this profession, 44 years, but certainly doing a variety of work throughout those years. They all have prepared me for where I am right now. Even last summer when we saw what was going on across this country, there was looting, there was burning. But the one thing that jumped out for me as a practitioner for so many years was that this was planned. This coordinated effort was planned. And so you look at what was happening in one city. We saw a number of attempts here in our city. Same strategy. We saw it here. The thing different, we were able to stay ahead of it. We set a tone that you're not going to take over our police station. We know the cities where police officers were forced to retreat. Police officers were forced to retreat from areas that these mobs decided to take over, and said, we're not leaving. And then when the crimes were committed in these, what they call autonomous zones, they wouldn't even allow the police to enter in and conduct a proper investigation. That's insane for me. And so I wanted to set a tone that not here in Detroit, but more importantly, we have a relationship such that with our community and our activist community, they stood with us, they stood by us, and they rejected the fact that outsiders would come into our city and try to incite riotous behavior. Detroiters didn't want to stand for that.
Well, Chief, with so much upheaval and violence across the nation, we had the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, Detroit Can't Breathe, and all the other outside agitators, as you coined them. I think Detroit may be one of the only larger cities that didn't experience the level of riots and property damage or burnings. What do you believe is the reason or reasons for this?
Well, I think I've already said it's our relationship with our community. And the fact that the tone I set, not here. We don't retreat here. And then I think it's also important to note that the mayor, on those days that we did have to use force because our officers were being attacked, the mayor certainly supported my decision to react in a way that was proper. We did not, and the mayor did not, want to see Detroit look like what we saw in all these different cities. So relationships do matter, and trust matters, and you can't have a safe city or prevail like we did last year if it had not been for those relations. But also as important, leadership. Leadership on the ground, being able to make a decision in real time and not wavering, because this is bigger than this chief and this department. This is about making sure that we kept our city safe. And so as I leave, that was important. And I can look back and, hope that we continue on an upward trajectory. I think it's also important to note that, when you talk about succession planning, the fact that we've had a number of our executives go on to become chiefs in other cities. I mean, that's really a testament when an organization is great. I remember a time when the LAPD, in the midst of its luster and the number of folks that left and became chiefs in other cities, that's a testament of an effective organization because other cities want what you have.
Well, how did that come to be? How did you become so united with the citizens and gain their trust after years of not having been there?
Transparency. People talk transparency, but what does that really look like? Mm-hmm. I didn't shy away from the bad news, and I certainly embraced our wins. And, are bad things going to happen? Are mistakes going to be made? Absolutely. But it's how you address it.
Well, you even implemented, the Operations Clean Sweep when the narcotics unit was raided by your own police department.
I raided my own narcotics unit. I did it very openly, very transparent, and I didn't shy away. And not to throw my predecessors under the bus, but this narcotics issue had been going on for some time, and people knew about it. But the bigger question is, what did they do about it? And so when you are open and transparent about the good and the bad, that's how you build trust-based relationships. Right. This is not the police trying to cover up something. And you lose trust when you do that. I think about some of these other cities, and in Chicago, a city I love, I saw what happened in the Laquan McDonald shooting some years ago when Rahm Emanuel was running for mayor. Bad decision to suppress the release of that video. And then after he was elected, magically, the FOIA request was honored and the video was released. But what did that do in terms of community police relations? It opened a wound that was already there, but opened it wide. So how do you trust an organization that purposely suppresses information that the community should know? And so that's the difference here in Detroit. And I didn't just start this here in Detroit. Whenever we're involved in a critical incident, I know especially if we have to take a life, the community, we're obligated to give them as much as we know immediately following that tragic event. The community has come to expect that here in Detroit, and we've had a number of those incidents.
Well, it's interesting because there's so much division, in our country and in our state, and I'm sure you've seen it in your city. And there are still some people who feel that, Detroit's not safe, and, there's, so many political issues involved, and, I'm sure who your critics are and what those critics say. And especially, in dealing with law enforcement, and they're talking about, using excessive force, or the police should be defunded. And, as someone who has prided himself on all the years of service and dedication, you've dedicated your life to the betterment of society and to people. You've served so many people in such an amazing, grand way. How do you discuss that with people rationally? How can you try to change someone's opinion or mind, or can you bridge that gap?
Well, we've done it, and certainly I promote unity. We've worked very effectively with our activist community. We didn't always agree. Many times we didn't agree, but I understood the importance of respect, and trying to meet somewhere in the middle, and even sometimes deciding, I don't totally agree with your position, but in the interest of working as partners, this is what I'm willing to do. And so just the fact that you sit down in a room and have a mature exchange, not something reckless, not knee jerk, and it's been a win for us. And that's why when we need the activist community to stand with us, they'll do it. And many times over the summer, the weeks and days of protest, while most of it was peaceful, there were times that we needed their assistance, because we felt that these activists who love this city and want the best for this city wanted to make sure that the outsiders that were embedded among these peaceful protesters understood one thing: not here in Detroit. Mm-hmm. And so that made all of the difference. But that's what's sorely lacking in our country right now, around our state. Where's the unity? Where's the ability to have a discourse that's not disrespectful, but one that is about finding solutions? Where is that? And so that comes from, and people who sit in my seats who are leaders understand that. I could not have been effective if I didn't understand the importance of working with people. Something else I did internally that me and my predecessors wouldn't do, I talked to the line officers. I had an advisory board meeting once a week just of police officers. And the reason why that was important, because I wanted to know, what do we need to do differently? What's working? What's not working? And just having an exchange like that really gave them a lot of inspiration to do the best job they could do, because now they feel like they own part of what our mission is. Mm-hmm. This is not some hierarchical top-down, do as I say. That doesn't work anymore. I came on at a time and rose through the ranks, understanding what didn't work then.
Well, it's interesting that you did come in at a time when there was a lot of upheaval, and throughout your tenure as chief, you've seen your share, and then obviously you're ending it with some upheaval in the last, year and a half with the pandemic. Yes. And also race relations. And, as a Black man leading a group of men and women of all races, of all nationalities, how did you bridge some of the racial tensions within your own communities, within your own, people that you were serving?
That's a great question. And we did a good job at really bridging that gap. As a leader, I know I had to set the tone for the organization. But in setting that tone also means having the ability to talk about sensitive issues, talk about issues of race, addressing issues of race, and letting people in the organization that there's a zero tolerance for discriminatory treatment of each other or out in the community. Zero tolerance. And yes, I've had to make a few examples to really reinforce that message. But the key is being able to have open conversations about race. First and foremost, we're all Americans. We're Michiganders.
Right.
We're Detroiters. We share concerns. Now, we may have different, ideas of how to address an issue, but that's okay. But you talked about it, and what's so destructive is when people paint professions or an organization with a broad brush.
Right.
And it's sad. And so you have to be courageous enough, bold enough to stand up in the midst of adversity and just tell the truth. And that's won a lot of support. So I think what's really helped me, and as I now evaluate my future, my next steps, I've been approached, it's no secret, by many in our community, many in the GOP party, who said, we want you to run for office.
Well, there's flattered. A lot of rumors out there, for sure.
A lot of rumors, and I got to tell you, I'm excited about the interest. I'm flattered, humbled, and I got to tell you, I'm certainly something I'm considering. I have not made a decision yet, but it's just not here in the state of Michigan. I'm getting calls from around the country. And I think one of the things that I keep hearing that resonates is leadership. Mm-hmm. Common sense leadership, which I guess is not so common any longer. You've heard me speak out on some of the reckless comments made by some of those folks who sit in seats of influence, and I didn't say seats of leadership, mm-hmm. but very reckless comments that don't do any good to move our city or our country forward. And so unapologetically and boldly, courageously, I stood up and denounced. I'm talking about your U.S. Congresswoman, Rashida Tlaib. Mm-hmm. I was not going to remain silent. And so I think because I've always taken a firm stand on issues, and again, unapologetic, whether it's defund the police, whether it's anti-police rhetoric, dismantling the police, I get to speak out. And so it's amazing how some reject when I come out and say it, but it's okay for other folks to just come out and make reckless comments that don't do any good, and they don't speak. And when you're elected, you're a public servant and you work for the people. And so when you look at our vulnerable communities in Detroit, who speaks for them? They want the police. Who speaks for them?
Who helps them? Who comes to them when the time of need?
Exactly. They don't want to defund the police. Mm-mm. They want to fund the police. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's so important. So I think taking stands, and I certainly have won a lot of support from law enforcement, not just statewide, but around this country. And I hate to admit it, but there's not many who sit in the chief's seat that boldly stand up and denounce the madness. It's sad.
Well, I have a question, and I don't know if you know how you'd like to answer this, but when did showing respect for our country's flag, and even those who serve our country and that have created our great freedoms, when did that become a partisan issue? When did raising a flag mean you were a Republican or a Democrat hated a flag. It just, to me, it's just like you said, there's no sense in it at all. And I don't understand how a symbolism or a metaphor for, maintaining peace among all races and equality among all people. I'm a firm believer of that. But why does one mean you don't do the other?
I agree. I've never seen a time in my professional career like this. Certainly there's a movement, and the movement is to undermine our government as we know it. The loud voices who represent the minority in our country are the ones that are being heard. But when you're in a position of leadership, whether it's as a chief of police or as a governor, a mayor, elected leaders across this country have to stand up. And to remain silent is just not an option. That's not public service.
Well, remaining silent is almost saying you're complicit with it, right?
Yeah, I'm complicit. And I got to tell you a short story. Probably a month and a half ago, I held a news conference because we had a series of 4 incidents where officers were attacked violently by suspects. And 3 of them, the suspects shot at the officers. And so I wanted to have a press conference, and did, to denounce this type of aggression, this violence being directed to our police officers. I did that, but in the process of setting it up, I asked a very prominent local activist to stand with me, join me in denouncing this violence. And his response to me, without hesitation, I will not stand with you. So when you have people in very key positions that have influence, what's the message? Now, this same person will stand with me and has stood with me when there was an issue involving an officer who may have committed some type of misconduct. That's okay. We can stand with you on that, but I'm not going to stand with you on this. That was shameful.
Can I ask if was it because the officers were white? Is that why he didn't want to stand with you?
That's a good question. In fact, in those 4 incidents, he didn't bother to ask. This involved some white, some black officers that were shot at. He didn't ask the question. Unfortunately, the media drives out some in our community. Well, if the officer is white and the person shot is black, it's got to be a bad shooting. Mm-hmm. And what's so disheartening is that no longer do the facts matter. It was the incident out in Columbus, Ohio, where a African-American teenage girl was armed with a knife. Officer gets a call, emergency call for service, armed person with a knife. He gets there, and we know to save the life of another, he used deadly force. With some without hesitation, without knowing all the facts, including a prominent basketball player, LeBron James, looped it right in the same bucket as if it was on par with the George Floyd murder. And so that's a problem. And so, or someone getting an Oscar gets up, and anytime there's a police shooting, refers to it as police violence.
Right.
And so nobody challenges these folks when they should be.
Well, and you were one of the first.
I'm sorry. No,
I was. Came out and denounced it, right? I mean, denounced the murder.
I was the first chief that came out and called it murder, mm-hmm. and that Chauvin should have been arrested based on probable cause. We saw the video evidence, but I mean, if a police officer responded to the scene of a crime, and there was evidence to support that this crime was committed and perpetrated by this person, we have the legal right to make an arrest. And that's all I was saying. And that's when the lines get blurred. That's when you start losing trust in a community. And so we have to do better. And in fact, going back to that knife shooting in Columbus, I think it was NBC, police officer shoots teen. But they conveniently left out of the story that what led up to the shooting, conveniently left out that she was armed with a knife. And and when you looked at the or listened to the tape of the initial call, it was in there. So
right. You made a quote. You've said various quotes that have been, some controversial, some met with some obviously critics, but
right.
I find it, it's very telling and very poignant, relative to the social media platform and all the issues that we've seen over the years. But you indicated, while it's been established that hate speech is protected by the First Amendment, we're talking about people specifically saying on Facebook that they want to kill white police officers.
Right.
And that's protected. But yet they can't say, I want to kill, the president or vice president of the United States.
It's utterly ridiculous. Let me tell you a story. It's a true story. There was a threat made against me, and the person responsible, he had scrolled on a wall. As I remember, it says, kill James Craig, kill all police, or something like that. So we identified who the suspect was. It was a terrorist threat. We gave it to our prosecutor. And the only thing the prosecutor told me was, we don't think there's enough there. And said, why don't you just add to your security team? So I was appalled by that response. I took it to then Attorney General Bill Schuette. I said, I got this situation as threat. He charged him. So you can't threaten to take someone's life. It's just like when it's appalling, this most recent news, I got to talk about it in a news show later on, that Amazon is peddling this anti-police sweatshirt. I mean, you purchase it through the Amazon website. They don't make the item. It just simply says, Blue Lives Matter. Once again, another reckless statement. But why would Amazon? I'm not saying they support, but maybe one could argue they support if they're going to, peddle this item through their website.
Well, it's interesting how certain groups can go and have rulings. For instance, recently, when Judge Michelson of the U.S. District Court ruled that the Detroit police cannot use excessive force to deter protesters. So they have their protection.
It's a little more. She did make a ruling, but the most significant part is that only if we had to.
Well, but you typically, in your department, under your leadership, the police officers only used force when the protesters weren't peaceful. Exactly.
And I stand by it. And so.
But so if groups like that can get protected, and rightfully so, why can't law enforcement who serve every day?
Well, and that's a great point. And make no mistake, this conversation about stripping away qualified immunity from police officers is a veiled strategic effort to dismantle policing as we know it. So some have kind of backed a little bit off of this whole defund. They recognize that defund hasn't worked out very well. And so that's coming from the far, far left progressives that continue to drive it. And the more moderate Democrats are taking well, we don't necessarily agree with defund, but you're still talking about ending qualified immunity. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're supporting ending qualified immunity, what do you think is going to happen? Let's ask New York. New York City Council voted to end qualified immunity. Look at what's happening in New York right now. Right. 75% increase in officers leaving, retiring, resigning. Who would want to do this work if you're not protected? And then what other impact does it have? So if a police officer decides to stay, they do as little as possible. Mm-hmm. Because you can be sued virtually for anything. You might go and administer a life-saving effort to a child, and the child may succumb to whatever injury or illness, and the officer did the very best, and now the officer gets sued. So now this officer is what? Has no protection. Mm-hmm. And as it stands right now, what they conveniently leave out of the conversation, if an officer engages in criminal misconduct, say excessive force, violating someone's constitutional rights, they're not going to be indemnified anyway. I mean, it's just not. And so, and if your premise or the crafters of this, if their whole idea is to hold police officers accountable, I get that, but that's not how you do it.
Right.
There's already a provision in place. If an officer goes out and gets involved in a shooting, and a shooting is deemed to be out of policy, deemed to be criminal, do you think Chauvin was given immunity? And so that's what conveniently gets left out of the conversation.
Well, don't you think, Chief, that a lot of this has to do with education, not just within the Detroit or any law enforcement agencies, educating their staff and continuing the education and making sure their tolerance for, some of the acceptance of this bad behavior is not, grown over time. They say that the more they're involved in something, or the more you continue to do something, your tolerance level for it grows. But that's, becoming aware and educated, but it's also educating the public. So
absolutely,
as a leader, to bring these two divided sides together, like you said, instead of standing mute or, not saying anything at all, or just going with the program, you have to get involved. You have to speak out. You have to educate. Knowledge is empowerment. And in order to bring people of, any side of any issue together.
Right.
Or just like you said, common ground, or just some rational, reasonable way.
Right.
It's about educating and empowering. And didn't you do that within your own department?
Absolutely.
And now moving forward, if we are lucky enough that you do decide to run, I mean, don't you believe that that's important, especially with these racial tensions and all the strife that we've seen?
Absolutely, it's important. This division has to stop. Again, we're going to see things differently. I mean, I've worked in different cities. The way I view the world of policing was probably different than people who have just grown up in the same organization. And so I was able to come in with fresh ideas that, frankly, people never heard of. And so, as I, ponder and reflect on my career and evaluate my next move, that's important. And it's important for the people that will support me to know that I'm a unifier. Mm-hmm. Nothing changes. It doesn't matter about party. It's about the person. And I think that's what's most important to communicate. And that's the thing that the people that have approached me and certainly want me to give strong consideration. That's what they see. That's what they want. And I know people are sick and tired of the politics. They want leadership.
Well, I know I want to be very respectful of your time. And I know we only have a few minutes left.
Right.
But I'd like you to perhaps opine with respect to what do you believe at this moment is Michigan's greatest issue?
Well, there are a lot of issues. I really don't want to get into a response that I would give if I was a candidate. And since I'm not that,
fair enough.
But there are issues that I'm deeply concerned about. And again, I never, my life goal was to become a chief of police in my profession. I would have never dreamed 3 weeks ago when rumors started circulating that I would be sitting here retired from a profession that I love to consider entering into politics. Would have never dreamed that. But sometimes, you get called to another stage, a bigger stage, to make difference, a much larger difference. I recognize, and that was one of the things that drove me into becoming a chief of police. I understood very early in my career that as a police officer, I could change. What I could change would be very small. But as I began to move up the ranks, I could have more influence. As a chief of police, you certainly can have a lot of influence on how a city is policed or how public safety is administered. And we can't lose sight of the fact that there have been some issues here in Detroit in the past relative to policing, many cities I've worked in. So there are places that need reform, common sense reform, and not just take a broad brush and say the entire profession is systemically racist or the entire profession is corrupt. What do you say to those 99% heroes that serve every day who are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, for someone that they don't even know? That's a special person. And they deserve better than what they're getting today.
You said it great. And absolutely, I agree. And I think a lot of it is because people, they truly don't want to know what they don't know. They don't take the time to read beyond the sensationalized headlines. So Chief Craig, I want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And your intelligence, your wisdom, your expertise, and all the years of amazing service. Thanks for everything that you've done. And I'm very grateful you're here today.
Well, I look forward to coming back at some point, especially if once I make a decision what that something will be. I would love to be able to come back and talk.
We'll welcome you with open arms. I would love to have you. And you're a dear friend and a great leader. And I'm very humbled by your presence today. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're so welcome. You have a great one now.
Stay well.
I will. See you later. Bye now.
And everyone on our show today, thank you so much for being with us. And I hope you got something out of it as I did. And he's just such a great man, strong leader, not afraid to speak his opinion or his mind. And I believe that it is in doing that and everybody speaking their minds, but in a rational, reasonable, logical way where we can just talk and converse, doing it in a very kind, amicable way instead of a polarizing way. That's a way that we can come together and unify not only our great nation, but keeping it locally here within our great state of Michigan. We have so much here in Michigan, so many amazing natural beauties and wonders, and our our people here, our community. We have so many different types of people and personalities and races and religions, and we should be honoring everybody, not polarizing them because they're different or because they believe differently or because they perhaps are just honoring our country or honoring a flag. You know, when you honor something, you should look at that person and say, why are you doing it? You know, what is beneath that? What are they seeing that I don't? Perhaps that will deepen your understanding. So instead of being so quick to judge, be a little more open-minded, and then perhaps not only will you grow as a person, but your world will grow as a result. And so that's my one ask as we leave our show today. I really hope you take the time to learn and understand something from a different opinion or something from a side that you maybe never have considered before, and understand why that person may be thinking or doing what they are. Because only then can we get a better understanding of everything and everyone, and even ourselves. So until our show next time, I want all of you to stay well and stay safe, and remember to be grateful for the wonderful state we live in and the wonderful country of which we're a part. And always, always stay true to you, but also broaden your perspective so you can gain a better understanding of everyone around you. Until next time, everybody, stay safe and stay well. Bye for now.